Right, so I'm back for a video today about this bad boy. Look at this. This is the Hikvision DS2CD 2T45GOP-I. Such a lovely model number that, isn't it? Just rolls off the tongue. It is a very special camera, this, and I thought I'd make a video because this is probably the only time I'll ever actually hold one. These are a very unique camera. They have a 1.68mm lens. In fact, you can see it there on the front. So all fisheye weirdness. So the reason I'm doing this video is because I wanted to beat all the people on YouTube, really. No one else seems to be doing videos about these, which is weird because it's not exactly an expensive camera, and it seems like it could have some genuinely good use cases. In fact, this isn't even my camera. This is for a future installation where they want to cover their entire garden with one camera, essentially. They've got a really wide garden. This is a really wide angle camera. So it seems like a match made in heaven. But I could not for the life of me find out anything about this camera. No one has any comparisons with a standard 2.8mm Hikvision, for example. There's just people saying, here's what the image looks like. We've put it in a position that makes it really hard to judge the camera. As an airplane goes by outside. So yes, we are going to be basically testing this camera. So behind me in this lovely, really overexposed window, we have my test situation window. I don't know, it's got a name, I don't know. As you can see, I test cameras here. This is an older IP camera, but I used to put analog cameras there back in the day. Now I just shove an IP camera out there and we see what the image looks like. I've done this with so many cameras. I can't remember, I think this is a 4-megapixel camera as well, so that is a bit of a shame, really. I think this should be 4K or 8 megapixel because at 1.68mm, that's a very wide image. There's not going to be a ton of detail in there. But hey, let's throw it out the window and see what the quality is like. So the 180-degree image is actually pretty damn good. This is pretty much basic stock settings, except with the wide dynamic range turned on with a 50% setting, simply because it would look terrible without wide dynamic range with this scene. As you can see, we're seeing literally everything. Now this is because it's a fisheye lens. Now we are going to turn off the lens correction, and you can do that in the settings, and you'll see it does look a bit weird without the lens correction turned on. But with the lens correction turned off, as you can see, you get a little tiny bit more on your screen. So it's kind of a, would you rather the fisheye look or a more normal look, but less on the screen. So I've just finished throwing this camera out the window, and that is insanely wide. Like, I can see everything. I can also see mostly roof tiles and a lot of sky, which is not always desirable, but if you have a really wide area you want to cover, this is a really good budget option to do that. Like, I don't even know how much the Hikvision Panaview cameras are, but I know they're quite pricey. They might even be 4 figures, I can't remember. But this is insanely good. So why is no one else raving about this camera? And I think the real reason is that, well, it's got limited appeal. They only sell, I think, 2 models with this 180-degree lens. They sell a turret and this bullet. And I can only think of a few situations where it's a good idea to use this. Like, maybe you've got a car park, you want to cover all of the car parking spaces with one investment. That's great. And obviously you've got the micro SD card slot on the bottom. You could do local recording. It's a pretty decent little camera. But how does it compare to a standard 2.8mm camera, for example? because I think that's where this is going to be compared to, because the 2.8mm is kind of the standard wide camera for these installations. 2.8 is basically the default for most people. I pretty much use 2.8 on all cameras really these days. But let's compare it to a 2.8mm camera. I'm interested to see what it looks like. So I've got my 2.8mm camera. Unfortunately, it's not a bullet. I just don't have that many spare bullets at the moment, but I've got a million spare Vandal domes for whatever reason. This is actually quite a unique one. It's a 2125 FWD-IM. It's got a HDMI port on there instead of a 12 volt connector. Interesting design. This was on my front door, but I switched it for a 3 megapixel, mainly because I didn't really feel safe putting that HDMI port outside, and also this pigtail is really thick. This is more of an indoor design camera. So I'm going to get it up on the computer recording, and we'll stick it out the window, and we'll see what 2.8mm looks like compared to the 1.68mm. I think this would be an interesting little test. So this is the 2.8mm camera. It's pretty much what we expect. I have to keep moving the camera around to cover the same area that we was doing with the 180-degree camera. It's not a huge difference. I was expecting a bigger difference, but there is a difference there. So there we go, that's the test. The 2.8mm camera, which is still plugged in, versus the 1.68mm wide angle 180-degree camera. And it's kind of surprising results. I was actually amazed with how wide the 2.8mm is. But then again, I'm filming this out of a loft window. It's kind of a difficult test, but you can definitely see more in the frame with the 180-degree camera. And this is a really good observation camera, which is what I'm going to call it. This is not a great camera if you want to recognize details at a distance, because it's simply, the wide angle lens is just not in your favor. The more wide your lens is, the less detail you're going to get at a distance, which makes sense because you're essentially zooming out even further. It's kind of like with this camera here, I've got a 19mm lens on it. It's about arm's length away, but you can still see me quite well. But if I step further back, the detail gets a little worse and probably also out of focus. This is a fantastic price for what it is, if you ask me. But I think there is a limited market, which is why there's not much content on it. But I think it's a pretty good damn little camera.